Some stories leave you shocked, some make you question reality, and some haunt you forever. These are the chilling real-life events that seem too terrifying to be true, but they are. Story 1. The dark truth behind the film. I was 16 when I first read about Frida Kahlo's life. Her art, her struggles, her affairs, everything about her fascinated me. So when a film about her, starring the brilliant Salma Hayek, was released, I couldn't wait to watch it. I expected a biopic that would capture her raw passion, her time in France, her tumultuous love life. What I wasn't expecting was that scene, an explicit, almost pornographic moment between Salma Hayek and Ashley Judd. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't necessary for the story. It wasn't even true to Frida's real life. It just seemed forced. Years later, the horrifying truth came out. Harvey Weinstein, the notorious predator, had his hands all over the project. He wanted Salma. When she refused his advances, he made her life hell, forcing her into that scene just for his own sick pleasure. Salma later revealed that he even had a special private cut of the film made just for himself. That makes me sick to my stomach. What terrifies me the most is thinking about all the other women who weren't as lucky, who didn't have the protection of someone like Edward Norton, who was working on the project and may have kept Weinstein from pushing further. But how many others weren't so fortunate? How many stories like this remain buried? Story 2. Peanut Butter Jelly Time. The tragic end of a viral star. You know the song. That ridiculous, goofy internet meme from the early 2000s, Peanut Butter Jelly Time, was everywhere. It was the sound of a simpler, sillier internet. But did you know the man behind the song met a fate so dark, so tragic, that it completely overshadows the carefree joy of the meme itself? His name was Jermaine Fuller. He was the lead singer of the Buckwheat Boys, the group behind the song. In 2002, something went terribly wrong. A concerned citizen in Las Vegas reported that a man was firing a gun in the city. When police arrived, they found Jermaine, agitated, armed, and unpredictable. What followed was an intense shootout, forcing Jermaine to flee into an apartment building, where he took 2 tenants hostage. The police tried everything to get him to surrender. Then, in a bizarre twist, they realized something. Jermaine Fuller was the brother-in-law of none other than Snoop Dogg. They reached out to the rapper hoping he could talk Jermaine down. Snoop recorded a desperate plea, begging him to surrender, promising that things could still be okay. But Jermaine never responded. Hours passed. The hostages managed to escape. When SWAT finally entered, they found him barricaded in the bathroom, dead. Some say he took his own life. Others believe he succumbed to the injuries from the earlier shootout. But one thing is certain. The man behind one of the internet's most famous memes met an end so tragic, so surreal, that it almost doesn't seem real. It makes you wonder, how many of our favorite internet moments are hiding stories we were never meant to know? Story 3. The Woman in the Car, a haunting discovery. I work at an apartment complex. I've seen a lot of strange things. But nothing has ever haunted me the way this story does. There was a woman, a kind, quiet resident who always paid 3 months of rent in advance. Nothing unusual about that. But then she stopped answering her phone. Days went by. Her family became concerned and contacted us, asking for a welfare check. Legally, we couldn't enter her apartment, so we called the police. An officer arrived. My assistant manager escorted him to her unit. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. The lights were still on. The bed was neatly made. No signs of distress. Her car was still parked outside, untouched. But as my assistant manager walked past the vehicle, she felt something. A chill. An inexplicable sense of dread. Something just felt wrong. The cop checked the car. The windows were tinted. The doors were locked. They saw nothing. So they left. The next morning, the woman's sister arrived, desperate for answers. She went straight to the car. What she found inside was horrifying. The woman had taken 2 large cooking pots, filled them with charcoal, and lit them on fire before lying down in the back seat. The carbon monoxide had slowly filled the car, killing her in her sleep. She had been there the whole time. Just a few feet away from where the officer and my assistant manager had stood the day before. That realization still sends shivers down my spine. Because we were right there. And we didn't know. Story 4. The Missing Call, a chilling coincidence. It started with a simple voicemail. A man named Daniel received a call from his best friend, Mark, late at night. He was too tired to answer, so he let it go to voicemail. The next morning he checked it. Mark's voice was panicked, desperate. Danny, please pick up. I need to talk to you. Something's happening, man. I don't know what to do. Please, call me back. Daniel's stomach dropped. He immediately called Mark's number, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when he noticed something odd. The timestamp on the voicemail read 2:32 a.m., but the police report said Mark had died in a car crash at 2:27 a.m. Daniel was in disbelief. He replayed the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. The call came 5 minutes after Mark had already been pronounced dead. How was that possible? Daniel went to the crash site, desperate for answers. That's when he found Mark's phone, shattered but still intact, lying among the wreckage. He picked it up, scrolling through the call history. The last outgoing call was to him, made at exactly 2:32 a.m. To this day, Daniel has no explanation for how his friend managed to call him from beyond the grave. Story 5. The Stranger in the Photo, a Chilling Discovery. A woman named Emily loved taking Polaroid pictures. She had a collection spanning years, each photo a moment frozen in time. One night, she was going through old albums when she noticed something strange. In the background of multiple pictures, taken at different places in different years, was the same man. Always in the background. Always slightly out of focus. She had never noticed him before. But there he was, standing in the crowd at her high school graduation, sitting on a bench near her college campus, even walking behind her in a vacation photo taken in another country. A chill ran down her spine. She pulled out more pictures, flipping through them as panic set in. The man was in nearly every single one. Sometimes watching. Sometimes just lingering. But always there. Terrified, Emily ran to her parents, showing them the photos. Her father's face went pale. "That's impossible," he whispered. He pulled out an old newspaper clipping. It was an obituary. A man had gone missing decades ago, someone her father had known. Someone who had died before Emily was even born. And yet, there he was, in her photos, watching her. Story 6. The Man Who Vanished, a Reality-Bending Nightmare. Alex was on a road trip with his friends when they stopped at a diner in a small town. Inside, everything seemed normal: warm lighting, the smell of fresh coffee, a waitress who greeted them with a smile. They sat down, ordered food, and laughed over inside jokes. Then, in the middle of their conversation, Alex turned to his best friend, Josh. And Josh was gone. Just gone. His seat was empty. His food was untouched. His jacket, which had been draped over the chair, was nowhere to be seen. Confused, Alex looked around. "Hey, where's Josh?" he asked. His friends frowned. "Who's Josh?" one of them asked. Alex laughed nervously. "Stop messing with me. Josh, our best friend. The guy who's been with us this whole trip?" Their expressions remained blank. "Dude, we don't know anyone named Josh." Alex's blood ran cold. He pulled out his phone, searching for texts, photos, any proof that Josh existed. Nothing. There were no messages. No pictures. No evidence that Josh had ever been real. Panicking, Alex ran to the waitress. "Excuse me, there was a guy with us. Tall, dark hair, wearing a gray hoodie. Did you see where he went?" The waitress gave him a confused look. "Sweetie, you came in alone." Alex never found Josh. He searched, begged his friends to remember, even checked his hometown, but there was no record of him anywhere. It was as if he had never existed. And the worst part? The more Alex tried to remember Josh's face, the blurrier it became. Story 7. The Forgotten Passenger, a Ride That Never Ended. It was a rainy night when Daniel, an Uber driver, picked up a new ride request. The location was in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood. No houses nearby, just an empty street corner. When he arrived, a young woman in a black hoodie slipped into the back seat. She was quiet, barely acknowledging him. Her destination was a house about 15 minutes away. As they drove, Daniel tried making small talk, but she didn't respond. Figuring she just wanted a quiet ride, he focused on the road. They arrived at the address. He turned around to let her know they'd reached her stop. But the back seat was empty. The car door had never opened. The seatbelt was still buckled. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He quickly checked the app. Maybe he had made a mistake. But no, the trip was still active, the timer still running. The destination was marked as arrived. Heart pounding, he looked up at the house. A single light flickered on inside. An old woman slowly stepped out onto the porch. She squinted at his car, then shook her head. "Did you give a ride to a girl in a black hoodie?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. The woman sighed heavily. "That was my daughter. She used to take an Uber home every night after work. But one night, she never made it. Her car was found in a ditch. She died on this road 4 years ago." Daniel's skin crawled. Without another word, he ended the ride and sped away, his heart pounding louder than the rain. That night when he checked his Uber app, the trip was gone. No record of the ride. No payment. No proof she had ever been there. But Daniel knew what he saw. And he would never drive that road at night again. Story 8. The Disappearing Cabin, a Hiker's Nightmare. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. James loved hiking alone. Just him, nature, and the quiet isolation of the woods. He had picked a remote trail in the Appalachian Mountains, one that promised breathtaking views and complete solitude. Halfway into his hike, the weather turned. The bright afternoon sky dimmed under thick storm clouds, and the wind howled through the trees. James knew he needed shelter. That's when he saw it, an old wooden cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, but the door was slightly ajar as if inviting him inside. Stepping in, James was greeted with a single dusty chair, a small table, and a fireplace filled with ash. He set his bag down, planning to wait out the storm. Then something odd happened. The fireplace lit up. Not all at once, just a few small embers glowing faintly in the ash, as if someone had just left minutes ago. But the air inside was ice cold. James' stomach tightened. He scanned the room looking for signs of life. No footprints. No supplies. Just that one chair. Then he noticed something stranger. There was no window. The outside of the cabin had clearly shown one, but inside, there was only solid wood where the glass should have been. Confused, James stepped back, bumping into the chair. It rocked slightly, then stopped, frozen mid-motion. The air grew thick, pressing against him like an invisible weight. James grabbed his bag and bolted for the door, only to find that it wasn't there. The entrance he had just walked through was gone. Nothing but a wall of wood. His pulse pounded. He turned back to the chair. It was no longer empty. A dark figure sat there now, barely visible in the flickering light. No face. No sound. Just a vague human shape. James scrambled backward, clawing at the walls, searching for any way out. The figure didn't move. It only sat there, watching. Then just as suddenly, the door was back. Wide open. James didn't think. He ran. He didn't stop until he was miles away, back near his car. But when he turned around, panting, trying to get his bearings, the cabin was gone. No structure. No path leading to it. Just endless trees. James never found that spot again. And now, whenever he hikes, he always carries a compass. Because he knows, there are places in the woods that don't want to be found. And sometimes, they find you first. Story 9. The Man in the Closet, a Stalker's Patience. Jenna had always been cautious. Living alone in a small apartment, she double-checked her locks every night and made sure her windows were secure. But nothing could have prepared her for what she discovered one evening. It started with small things. A misplaced book. A closet door slightly ajar when she was sure she had closed it. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air. She convinced herself she was being paranoid, until the night she heard the breathing. It was late. She had just turned off the TV and was heading to bed when she heard it, soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere inside her apartment. Her stomach clenched. She froze, holding her breath, straining to listen. The sound was coming from her closet. Heart pounding, she grabbed her phone, inching toward the door. With shaking hands, she flung it open. Nothing. Just her clothes hanging neatly, untouched. She let out a breath, feeling foolish. But the feeling of unease never left. The next morning, she called a friend, asking him to check her apartment while she was at work. Hours later, he called her, his voice shaking. "Jenna, you need to get home. Now." She rushed back, finding him pale and wide-eyed. He pointed to the closet. Inside, behind her clothes, was a small, hidden door, a maintenance access panel she had never noticed before. The latch was broken, and inside was a blanket, a pillow, empty food wrappers. Someone had been living there. Jenna moved out the next day. Story 10. The Vanishing Neighbor, a Forgotten Life. Ethan had lived in his apartment for 3 years. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. His next-door neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was an elderly man who mostly kept to himself. Occasionally, Ethan would see him in the hallway, exchanging brief nods, but they never spoke. One day, Ethan noticed something strange. Thompson's mail was piling up. Newspapers stacked against the door. The lights inside were always off. At first, Ethan brushed it off. Maybe he had moved out. Then came the smell. A faint, sickly odor seeped into the hallway. It grew stronger with each passing day. Concerned, Ethan called the building manager. They knocked. No response. Eventually they opened the door. What they found made Ethan's stomach churn. Mr. Thompson was sitting in his recliner. His TV was on, frozen on a paused movie screen. His food, now completely rotten, sat uneaten on the table. He had been dead for months. No one had checked on him. No one had noticed. And the worst part? The only reason anyone even found out was because of the smell. Ethan couldn't sleep for days after that, thinking about how easily someone could just disappear. Sometimes the most innocent-seeming stories hide the darkest secrets. And sometimes the people suffering the most are right in front of us, completely unnoticed. Have you ever experienced something that at first seemed normal, but later turned out to be something much more chilling? Tell me in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, this rabbit hole only goes deeper.